Good day everyone. My name is Vicuña Princess Angel C, reporter from Group 1. So my report is all about fiscal function and fiscal policy. So, let's start. What is fiscal? According to Merriam-Webster, fiscals derived from the Latin noun fiscus, meaning treasury. In ancient Rome, fiscus was the term for the treasury controlled by the emperor, where the money was literally stored in the basket and was collected primarily in the form of revenue from the province. So, meaning, according to Merriam-Webster, ang salitang fiscal ay galing sa Latin na fiscus, ibig sabihin ay treasury or basket, ibig sabihin ay basket ng salapi na kapit ng government, at ang pera na ito ay nagmumula sa mga tax o buwis, at ito ang ginagamit para i-provide ang pangangailangan ng economy. So, ayan, next. Another term for fiscal. So, sabi dyan is relating to government revenue, especially taxes. So, next is another term, a legal or treasury official in some countries. So, fiscal function is a government function that involves the spending or raising of revenue. Fiscal function can be divided into two broad categories, spending function and revenue function. Spending function involves the expenditure of funds by the government in order to provide goods and services to the public. Revenue function involves the collection of taxes and other revenue by the government in order to provide and finance its spending. So in short, spending function is paggastos or paggasta ng pera ng government. And pag sinabi namang revenue function is pagko-collect ng tax ng government para meron silang finance sa mga gagastusin or meron silang pondo. So, common example ng spending function ay public education, public healthcare, and infrastructure. So, example ng infrastructure is transportation system like road, railways, tunnel, and bridge. Ayan ang kadalasan na pinaggagastusan ng government. Ang example naman ng revenue function is tax and other revenue. Example of other revenue ay payroll, penalty, aids, property tax, and iba pa. Diyan naman kumukuha ang government para gagamitin niya sa economy, katulad ng binigay kong example kanina sa spending function sa school, sa healthcare, and infrastructure, para may pondo ang government. And meron din namang both spending and revenue. For example, Social Security Program. So, involve both payment of benefits to retirees and collection of payroll tax from workers. So, ang ibig sabihin dyan ay yung isang individual na nagtatrabaho is hinihingi ng tax para sa kanilang retirement. So, ang example dyan is yung retirement benefits like SS, PhilHealth, Pag-ibig, pension, and meron pa sa disability benefits. So, meron 3 function ang fiscal. Ang una ay allocation, pangalawa ay distribution, and pangatlo ay stabilization. So, ang una ay allocation. So, resource allocation refers to the way in which the available factor of production are allocated among the various uses to which they may be put. It determines how much of the various kind of goods and services will actually be produced in an economy. So there are 2 types of goods in economy, private goods and public goods. Pag sinabing private goods ay exclusive to themselves. Example dyan is car, clothes, foods, and other. Only those who pay for these goods can get the benefit of such good. Next naman ay public goods. Kabaliktaran siya ng private goods. Ito naman ay non-exclusive. Kahit nagbayad ko o hindi, lahat ay magbe-benefit from public goods. For example is infrastructure, national defense, public education, environmental protection. So, yung allocations deals with allocation of public goods. Katulad ng binigay kong example kanina sa public goods, yung mga infrastructure, national defense, public education, and environmental protection ay need ng government na ipatupad ito, and these functions require a large-scale expenditure. And it is important to allocate the expenditure efficiently. Alam ng government kung saan o ano yung mga pangangailangan ng bansa. Dito sa allocation is ina-allocate ng government kung saan siya mag-spend ng expenditure. So next is distribution. The goal of distribution function is to reduce these disparities as much as possible by redistributing wealth and income. So there are three primary measures are outlined to achieve this target. Una is tax transfer scheme, 2. Progressive tax, 3. Higher tax. So pag sinabing distribution is to lessen inequality as much as possible through redistribution of income and wealth. Income redistribution is an economic practice which is aimed at leveling the distribution of wealth or income in a society through a direct or indirect transfer of income from the rich to the poor. In public finance, primarily three measures are outlined to achieve this target. Ang una ay tax transfer scheme. So in simple word, charging higher tax from the rich and giving subsidy to the low income. So next is progressive taxes. Can use to finance public service such as affordable housing, healthcare, and etc. Progressive tax takes a larger percentage of income from high-income groups than from low-income groups, and it's based on the concept of ability to pay. A progressive tax system made, for example, tax low-income taxpayer at 10%, middle-income taxpayer at 15%, and the high-income taxpayer at 30%. Next is higher tax. Can be applied to luxury goods or goods that are purchased by a high income. For example, say higher tax on luxury cars. Fiscal policy is needed for stabilization since full employment and price level stability do not come about automatically in a market economy. Without it, the economy tends to be subject to substantial fluctuation and it may suffer for sustained period of unemployment or inflation. Unemployment and inflation may exist at the same time, such as a situation is known as stagflation. So meaning, a stabilization ay ang function niya ay to eliminate or at least reduce fluctuation and unemployment na isa sa mga issue ng economy. Isa ito sa layunang fiscal policy na magkaroon ng matatag na economy. Para matugunan ito is kailangan merong sapat na serbisyo para sa publiko at price stability. Policy such as deficit budgeting during the time of depression and surplus budgeting during the time of boom helps achieve the required economic stability. So common example dito ay ang expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy. So pag sinabing expansionary fiscal policy, increase exaggerate demand by lowering taxes or increase government spending. So pag sinabi naman contractionary fiscal policy, reduce aggregate demand and fight inflation by raising taxes or reducing government spending. So next is fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is the application of tax and spending law by the government to affect microeconomic and overall economic circumstances. These include employment, inflation, economic growth, and the total demand for goods and services. So meaning, ang fiscal policy ay, ang government ay isa sa papel niya or role niya sa isang bansa ay mapalago ito. Sa pamamagitan ng fiscal policy ay isa sa paraan ng government tungkol sa paggastos at pagbubuwis sa isang bansa. Isa sa way para mapabago ang galaw ng ekonomiya. Para din mapaunlad at mapanatili na maayos ang bansa. So, the fiscal policy is based on Keynesian economic, a theory by economist John Maynard Keynes. the government can play a major role in influencing productivity level in an economy by adjusting the tax rate and public spending. So according to Keynesian economics, a theory by John Maynard Keynes, the government can play a major role in influencing productive level and economy by adjusting the tax rate and public spending. So meaning, mas mapapaunlad daw ang economic level sa pamamagitan ng adjusting the tax rate at na binibigay sa atin ng government at ang paggamit ng government sa pera na ito. Keynesian believed that consumer demand is the primary driving force in an economy and support the expansionary fiscal policy. The main tool of Keynesian economic are government spending on infrastructure, unemployment benefit, and education. So, para mas lubos natin makilala at malaman ano nga ba ang Keynesian economics, so may video ako na provide about sa Keynesian economics.
John Maynard Keynes was an English economist made famous for his work in the early to mid-1900s. Keynes was well known for his ideas on how to stimulate the economy during recessions to both shorten and lessen their impact. So how did Keynes suggest we avoid and escape recessions? Spending. More specifically, government spending. The economy is powered by the flow of money within itself, and this cash flow can be broken down into consumer spending and government spending, with taxation acting as a burden on the economy by reducing the amount that people have available to spend. An economy enters a recession when total spending decreases significantly, so Keynes's theory involved increasing government spending and decreasing the burden of taxation as the economy began to slow down. With the use of Keynesianism, interest rates fall, unemployment falls, and people have more money to spend when the economy begins to stagnate. The sacrifice of Keynesian economics is that the necessary government spending is fueled by spending reserves, inflating the currency, or taking on debt. To look at it very simply, an economy that allowed a market to simply correct itself would have much greater highs and lows, while Keynesian influence system would generate reserves in prosperous times through taxes and reduced spending, and then using those reserves in downturns by spending and reducing taxes. This reduces the volatility and fluctuations in the economy. John Maynard Keynes developed his theories in the 1930s in an attempt to understand the Great Depression and avoid such catastrophes in the future. Keynesian economics then continued to dominate global economic systems from the 1940s until the 1970s, where it met its unanticipated kryptonite, stagflation. Stagflation is where an economy suffers from both rising inflation and unemployment, along with low growth. Keynesianism couldn't effectively smooth the highs and lows when the economy's general direction was downward and failed to provide the necessary boost in growth. Nonetheless, Keynesianism has still proven to be an effective method of avoiding and reducing recessions, even being used as recently as, well, right now. If it weren't for Keynesianism, the COVID pandemic would have easily plunged the world into the worst depression in history. So, thanks, John.
Who make fiscal policy? Congress and the President make the fiscal policy through federal budget. So, ang kadalasan daw na naggagawa ng o nagpapatupad ng fiscal policy ay ang Congress and President through federal budget. So, ang ibig sabihin ng federal budget is a written document that indicates the amount of money the government expect to receive for a certain year and authorize the amount of money the government can spend that year. So, in the Philippines, fiscal policy is primarily undertaken by the Department of Budget and Management and Congress in the budget formulation process. The Department of Finance, its taxation function, and the various government department and agency in their execution of the budget. So, meron ako dito ang example video kung paano nga ba binubuo o pinaplano ang fiscal policy.
Ang bagong classroom sa public school malapit sa'yo, ang ginagamit na budget para sa PhilHealth. Itong mga road construction project at ang perang nilaan para sa COVID-19 pandemic. Ang bilyong-bilyong pondo dyan galing sa national budget. Paano ito binubuo at pinaplano ng gobyerno? Ito ang eksena kapag budget season na. Ang mga congressman at senador nagbabali-taktakan tungkol sa kung magkano ang ilalagay na budget sa education, health, infrastructure, at iba't ibang programa ng pamahalaan. Minsan, may debate pa.
Binigyan mo kami ng bagong barter tapos babawasan mo yun.
Imposible naman na hindi man lang nabanggit sa akin.
Paano tayo makatatawid sa new and better normal kung pilay at anemic nga ang budget natin para sa kalusugan?
Kailangan kasi nilang mabuo ang planong ito, ang General Appropriations Act o GAA. Ito ang budget ng bansa. Umaabot sa libo-libo ang pages nito dahil nakalista dito lahat ng pagkakagastusan ng gobyerno sa loob ng isang taon. Ayon sa ating saligang batas, sa loob ng isang buwan ng pagbubukas ng sesyon ng Kongreso, ito yung after ng SONA, dapat ay mag-submit na ang Pangulo ng proposed budget ng gobyerno. Pero mahaba na ang pinagdaanan ng budget proposal na ito. Halos isang taon bago isubmit ito ng Pangulo sa Kongreso, nagsisimula na ang preparasyon ng budget sa executive branch. Sisimula ng Development Budget Coordination Committee o DBCC ang pag-identify kung ano ang priority ng gobyerno sa budget. Ito ang lalamanin ng budget call o ang memo na maggagabay sa mga ahensya ng gobyerno, LGUs at GOCCs sa pagbubuo nila ng kanilang proposed budget para sa susunod na taon. Magpapatawag ng technical budget hearing ang DBM kapag naipasa na ng mga government agencies, LGUs at GOCCs ang proposed budget nila. Dito, kailangan mag-explain ng mga ahensya kung bakit iyon ang hinihingi nilang pondo. Parang thesis defense. Pero dito, kung kulang ang explanation mo, hindi bawas grade. Pero babawasan ang budget ng opisina mo. Pagkatapos nito, sisimula na ng DBM na i-compile ang lahat ng mga proposal para mabuo ang budget documents. Ang haba ng proseso, no? Pero dyan palang magsisimula ang trabaho ng Kongreso. The power of the purse belongs exclusively to Congress. Lahat kasi ng mga panukalang batas na may kinalaman sa pera, kasama na ang budget, buwis at taripa, ay dapat magsimula sa House of Representatives. Sa Kongreso, magkakaroon ng mga pagdinig para ihanda ang General Appropriations Bill base sa isinumiting budget ng Presidente. Ito ay pagdedebatihan sa plenary. Pagkatapos, ay isasubmit ang aprobadong panukala sa Senado. Hindi maaaring taasan ng Kamara at Senado ang kabuuang budget na inihain ng Presidente. Pero, pwede nilang bawasan ito para idagdag sa ibang programa o proyekto. Kagaya ng ibang batas, dadaan din ang budget sa isang bicameral conference committee kung saan ipa-finalize ng mga mambabatas ang laman ng panukala. Lalo na kung may magkakaibang provision mula sa version ng Senado at version ng House of Representatives. Pag pumasa na sa BICAM, kailangan itong ratipikahan ng Senado at ng Kamara bago ito ibalik sa Malacanang. Maaari na itong pirmahan ng Pangulo. Pwede niya rin itong i-veto o kaya naman ay i-line item veto. Maaari niyang i-reject ang mga item o provision sa budget na isiningit ng mga mambabatas. Ang mahabang prosesong ito, kailangan matapos bago magbagong taon. Sa ilalim kasi ng batas, mag-e-expire ang bawat budget tuwing katapusan ng taon. Kung Kung walang bagong aprobadong General Appropriations Act o GAA sa unang araw ng Enero, mapipilitan ang pamahalaan na gumastos base sa huling na aprobahang budget. Ito ang tinatawag na reenacted budget. Hanggat maaari, iniiwasan ng gobyerno na magkaroon ng reenacted budget dahil kadalasan, hindi na ito akma sa kasalukuyang pangangailangan ng bansa. Lugi din ang mamamayan dito. Sa ilalim kasi ng reenacted budget, ang pondong nakalaan para sa mga natapos na proyekto, pwede nang dalhin ng Pangulo kahit saang programa niya gusto. Kung mapipirmahan naman ng Presidente ang budget bago ang deadline, pwede nang maglabas ng pondo ang DBM sa iba't ibang ahensya para sa kani-kanilang mga proyekto. Ang Commission on Audit o COA naman ang in-charge na i-check kung tama at naaayon ba sa budget ang paggastos ng mga ahensya sa pondo. Ang resulta ng audit ang magsisilbing gabay sa gobyerno kung nararapat bang bigyan ng mas malaking pondo ang isang opisina sa susunod na taon. Pagkatapos ng lahat ng ito, magsisimula ulit tayo sa step 1 ng budget process.
So, makikita natin sa video is more on about spending function. So, kung paano tinaplano ng government ang paggastos para sa economy. So, naging bukas tayo na hindi lang basta-basta nagpapatupad ang government ng isang project. Minsan is may talo-talo pa silang nagaganap kung paano ba nito ipapatupad. And dito nakipag-debate pa sila na kailangan ng ganito sa isang bansa para sa ikaunlad ng ating bansa. So, napakadaming pag-aaral, pagsisiyasat ang ginagawa ng sangay ng gobyerno para sa ikaunlad ng ating bansa. And tinitingnan din nila kung tama ba yung allocation ng budget, ano yung mga priority, saka nila to i-implement or i-distribute bago nila to i-approve. May mga pag-aaral pa sila dito. So, in the end, isa sa goal ng President Bongbong Marcos is mapataas ang employment rate, price stability, and relief in business community sa nagdaang pandemic. So next is two types of fiscal policy. So there are two types, expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy means increase and generate demand by lowering tax or increasing government spending. So pag sinabi namang contractionary fiscal policy, reduce and generate demand and fight inflation by raising taxes or reducing government spending. So expansionary policy is nangyayari pag mababa yung output ng bansa dahil hindi lahat nagagamit ang resources and ginagawa ito para mapataas ulit o mapasigla. Kaya ang solusyon dito is madaming project na sinasagawa ang government like tulay, kalsada para magkaroon ng trabaho, tas pinapaliit ang taxes. So meron siyang cons. Deficit spending, so meaning madaming gastusin ang pamahalaan pero kulang naman yung kita o pera na nakokolekt ng government. Kaya nagkakaroon o malaking chance na magkaroon ng utang ang isang bansa. So, contractionary policy naman ay nangyayari pag mataas ang output ng bansa. Nagbabawas ng gastusin ng government habang pinapalaki ang buwis sa economy para maiwasan ang inflation. So next is fiscal policy and aggregate demand. So kanina pa natin binabanggit yung aggregate demand. So ano nga ba yon? So IS and LM model developed by John Hicks to illustrate Keynes' general theory. To understand how fiscal policy affects aggregate demand in an economy, it is useful to draw on simple microeconomic model that allows the use of diagram. We begin with the classic IS-LM model. So this model draws on notion of the circular flow of income in which the income received by worker, firm, and investor flow through the economy as it spend, like consume or invest. So in this model, government spending adds to income while taxation reduces it by draining resources from the private sector. Hence, the key fiscal parameter that affects aggregate demand is net government spending, or yung total expenditure less revenue. Because it is a model of comparative static, it lacks dynamic and expectation, and its results are often complemented with another analysis. So, ito, example of expansionary policy. So, decrease taxes, give people more money to spend, more demand, more demand, more production, more job, more demand. So, sa increasing spending naman, increased demand for goods, more demand, more production, more job, more demand. So, next is example ng contractionary fiscal policy. So, sa increased taxes, give people less money to spend, less demand, lower inflation. So, sa decreased spending naman, less money in economy, less demand, lower inflation. So, next is objective of fiscal policy. So, merong objective ang fiscal policy. Una ay economic growth, income redistribution, price stability, employment generation, and fiscal stability. So, first is economic growth. Fiscal policy seeks to stimulate investment, innovation, and job creation in order to advance economic growth. This entails setting up the required infrastructure, assisting with research and development, promoting a business-friendly environment by means of sustainable tax and regulatory measures. So, isa sa pinaka-objective ng fiscal policy ay economic growth, kung saan mapalago at mapaunlad ang economic. So, the Philippines is currently developing country and ang goal ng government natin is mapataas pa ang economic growth ng ating bansa. So, by creating an environment that encourages to investment, innovation, and job creation, this involves providing the necessary infrastructure, supporting research and development, and fostering a favorable business climate through appropriate tax and regulatory policy. So, isa sa pinaka-objective ng fiscal policy ay economic growth, kung saan mapalago at mapaunlad ang economic. So, the Philippines is currently developing country and ang goal ng government natin is mapataas pa ang economic growth ng ating bansa. So, by creating an environment that encourages to investment, innovation, and job creation, this involves providing the necessary infrastructure, supporting research and development, and fostering a favorable business climate through appropriate tax and regulatory policy. So next is income redistribution. Income redistribution is by modifying tax rate and government spending plan. Fiscal policy can contribute to a more fair distribution of income. Economic mobility may be encouraged, and income disparity can be decreased with the support of target social welfare program and progressive taxes. So, meaning ng income redistribution is fiscal policy ay nakakatulong to achieve equitable distribution of income by adjusting tax rate and government spending program. So, pag sinabi nga, di ba nating income redistribution is an economic practice which is aimed at leveling the distribution of wealth, or income in a society through direct or indirect transfer of income from the rich to the poor. So, yung tax na nakukuha sa mayayaman is nilalaan sa mga program na pinapatupad ng government like social welfare program. So, ang social welfare program is offer assistance to individual and families in need. With such program as healthcare assistance, food stamp, and unemployment compensation. So, example ng social welfare program is Medicaid, SSI, SNAP, TANF, Housing Assistance, Earned Income Tax Credit, General Assistance, Family Allowance Benefit, and Unemployment Compensation. So, next is price stability. So, price stability is by controlling aggregate demand through governmental spending and taxation. Fiscal policy may be utilized to reduce inflation. Contractionary fiscal policy can assist cool an economy and stop runaway inflation when it is overheated. So, meaning ng price stability is fiscal policy is nakakatulong to control ang inflation through government spending and taxation. When the economy is overheating, contractionary fiscal policy can help cool it down and prevent runaway inflation. So, pag sinabi natin ulit na contractionary policy, ay nangyayari pag mataas ang output ng bansa, nagbabawas ng gastusin ang government habang pinapalaki ang buwis ng ekonomi para maiwasan ang inflation. Price stability ay nasusukat pag mataas ang presyo ng mga produkto o inflation. Nasasabi na mayroong price stability pag stable yung pagtaas ng presyo ng produkto at serbisyo na sa isang bansa. So next is employment generation. Through government spending on public works project, infrastructure project, and other initiatives that increase demand for product and services, fiscal policy can provide job possibilities. As a result, there are more jobs being created in the public and private sector. So, meaning naman ng employment generation, so isa din sa objective ng fiscal policy ay mapababa ang unemployment rate. So, through expenditure project, makakatulong ito sa mga tao na magkaroon ng trabaho. Sa mga project na ipapatupad ng government, katulad na lang ng mga infrastructure na pinapagawa, katulad ng kalsada, tulay, sa mga public hospital at iba pa. So, pwede itong maging dahilan ng increased job creation in both the public and private sectors. So, lastly, fiscal sustainability. So, the preservation of sustainable budget position is one of the fundamental goals of fiscal policy. This entails maintaining a medium to long-term balance between government revenue and expenditure in order to keep the national debt at reasonable level. So, ang meaning naman ng fiscal sustainability sa madalang salita is sa kabila ng madaming expenditure na gustong ipagawa ang ating government, is kayang i-manage yung magiging debt or maiwasan ang utang ng bansa. Hindi mapataas kundi mapababa pa ito sa kabila ng umuunlad ang ating bansa. So, next is fiscal policy tools. So, merong two tools ang fiscal policy. Yung una is taxation and next is public spending. So, pag sinabing taxation, is refers to fees and financial obligation imposed by a government on its residents. The process by which the government of a country obtains money from its people in order to pay for its expenses. So, example of taxation is income, corporate, property, capital, gains, and sales tax. So, next is fiscal versus monetary policy. Remember, fiscal policy is a government approach to taxation, spending, and budgeting that influence economic activity and overall. When monetary policy is the management of money supply and interest rate by central bank to influence outcome such as inflation, employment, and economic growth. So, remember, fiscal policy is more on spending and taxing. In monetary policy refers to raising and lowering interest rate. Fiscal policy is directed by legislative and executive branches of government, which is the President and the Congress of the government. Monetary policy run by FED and Central Bank. Fiscal policy commonly used in expenditure of the economy, while the monetary policy is money supply. Fiscal policy changes are gradual, while monetary effect within 6 months. So, meron akong video na nagpapakita ng difference of fiscal policy and monetary fiscal policy.
Both economists and politicians are constantly worried about high unemployment and high inflation. Whenever a government tries to prevent these, it has two ways of doing so: fiscal policy and monetary policy. These are tools used to expand or slow economic growth. Let's start by exploring the differences between the two. The type of government involvement you're likely more familiar with is fiscal policy. Put simply, fiscal policy is the use of government spending and taxation to influence the economy. Just like any business or household, each year the government has a budget. It has bills to pay, and it has to figure out how to get the money to pay them. Politicians around the world routinely debate not only how they will pay their government's bills, but also how money should be spent for its citizens. They debate how much should be spent on specific programs, such as defense or education, and they also consider how much should be spent in total. Naturally, increases and decreases in government spending can have a big effect on a country's total economic output. In other words, fiscal policy is a powerful tool. The key to its power is the multiplier effect. The multiplier effect in fiscal policy is the idea that each dollar spent or not taxed by the government creates a change that is much greater than $1 in the national income. Essentially, any effect of a change in fiscal policy is multiplied. Anytime the government tries to increase output in an economy or speed up economic growth, that's known as expansionary policy. The main reason why a government would want to increase output is to keep unemployment low. Anytime it tries to decrease output, it's called contractionary policy. The reason why a government would want to decrease output or slow down an economy is to fight inflation. As we learned in the previous tutorial, both supply-side economics and Keynesian economics focus on different parts of fiscal policy. Supply-side economists like Milton Friedman thought it was better for governments to reduce taxes and limit its own public spending. When Friedman advised President Ronald Reagan during the 1980s, he supported a constitutional amendment to balance the federal budget. It's worth noting, however, that inflation was a much bigger concern in the United States than it was back in the 1960s. That's when Keynesian economists like John Kenneth Galbraith had more influence on the government. Galbraith was a big supporter of public spending, even if it was deficit spending. Deficit spending is when governments spend more money than is coming in as revenue, meaning it has to borrow more to pay the bills. Galbraith advised President Lyndon Johnson and greatly influenced Johnson's costly Great Society welfare programs. Taxes were also higher during the Johnson administration compared with the Reagan administration 2 decades later. To summarize, the basic tools of fiscal policy are either to raise taxes, lower taxes, raise spending, or lower spending. While both raising taxes and lowering spending are contractionary fiscal policy, lowering taxes and raising spending are expansionary fiscal policy. In addition to fiscal policy, governments can guide economies through monetary policy. Monetary policy is the way central banks influence the economy through the management of the money supply and interest rates. First of all, governments can influence how money is created. It's important to understand that money creation does not mean the government prints new coins and paper bills. Banks do this not by printing or minting money, but by simply going about their business. Let's look at an example. Say you want to take out a loan of $10,000. You decide to deposit that money into a checking account at your local bank. Once you have deposited that money, you now have a balance of $10,000. Anytime you want that money, you can access it. Therefore, it's part of the overall money supply. Now, banks make money by charging interest on loans. Your bank will lend part of that $10,000 you deposited. The maximum amount that a bank can lend is often determined by a required reserve ratio, which is the fraction of deposits that banks are required to keep in reserve. Say that ratio is 0.1 or 10%. That means it is required to keep 10% of your $10,000 demand deposit balance, or $1,000 in reserve. It can lend the rest out to whomever qualifies. Banks can also influence how much money is in circulation by controlling how high or low interest rates are. In general, the higher interest rates are, the less people are borrowing money, since that means they'd have to pay back more interest down the road. However, if interest rates are low, more people would be willing to take out loans, and therefore more money would be in circulation. So how can the government influence how much money banks are loaning out? Well, they can establish and regulate a central bank that helps get money into circulation. Let's look at the United States as an example. The Department of the Treasury is responsible for creating money in the form of currency. The Federal Reserve System, or central bank system of the United States, is in charge of putting that money into circulation. The Federal Reserve System, or Fed, can influence all banks in the country by establishing a nationwide required reserve ratio and raising or lowering the interest rates on loans to banks. Whatever the Fed does, the banks have to respond accordingly. For this reason, the Fed yields tremendous power over the American economy. A third way the Fed can influence monetary policy is through the buying and selling of government securities. This is also known as open market operations. A security is a financial asset you can trade. The most common government security the Fed trades is bonds, which in this case is an IOU issued by the government. In other words, the Fed is constantly loaning money to and collecting money from the federal government. To summarize, monetary policy includes money creation, managing the discount rate for the loaning out of money to banks, and open market operations. All three monetary policy tools are also meant to be either contractionary or expansionary. In general, whenever less money is in circulation, that is contractionary monetary policy. And whenever more money is in circulation, that is expansionary monetary policy. We will examine the Federal Reserve System in more depth in the next tutorial. In conclusion, the two main goals for both fiscal policy and monetary policy are to keep unemployment low and to curb inflation. Economists have discovered that achieving both usually leads to steady economic growth and can help consumers and producers survive the busts of business cycles.
So next is the importance of fiscal policy. So let's explore the importance of fiscal policy. First is fiscal policy plays a crucial role in stabilizing the economy during recession and boom. Next is market don't always allocate resources efficiently. Fiscal policy step in address market failure. Next is fiscal policy can reduce income inequality by redistributing wealth. So next is government spending on education and healthcare enhance human capital. So next is during major crises, fiscal policy provide emergency relief. And next, And lastly, investment in infrastructure, roads, bridge, utilities boost productivity and facilitate economic activity. So the fiscal policy plays a crucial role in stabilizing the economy during recession and boom. So pumapasok siya sa economic stabilization. So during economic downturns, expansionary fiscal policy such as increasing government spending or tax cuts can boost aggregate demand, create jobs, and stimulate growth. Conversely, during period of inflation or overheating, contractionary fiscal policy, reduce spending or higher taxes, help prevent excessive demand and maintain price stability. So next is market don't always allocate resources efficiently. Fiscal policy step in to address market failures. So pumapasok siya sa addressing market failures. So, for example, government invest in public goods like infrastructure, education, and healthcare. That the private sector may be underprovide social safety net, such as unemployment benefit, are also a part of fiscal policy to protect vulnerable citizens. So next is fiscal policy can reduce income inequality by redistributing wealth. So pumapasok sa income redistribution. So progressive taxation ensure the higher income individual pay a larger share of their income in tax. So social problem like welfare and food assistance provide support to low income households. Government spending on education and healthcare enhance human capital. So, investment in human capital. So, a well-educated and health workforce contributes to long-term economic growth. So, fiscal policy funds such projects benefit both current and future generations. During major crises, like the recent pandemic, fiscal policy provide emergency relief. So, pumapasok siya sa supporting economic recovery. So, stimulate package, unemployment benefit, and grants to business help revive economic activity. So, dito sa during major crisis is, ang example dito is mga, nung pandemic, yung mga subsidies, yung mga pinababigay sa ating na mga pagkain is dito nagbumula. Nagbumula din siya sa pondo na nanggagaling sa ating government para matugunan yung mga pangailangan natin sa kabila ng crisis na kinakaharap ng ating bansa. So, investment in infrastructure, roads, bridge, utilities, boost productivity and facilitate economic activity. So, pumapasok siya sa infrastructure development. So, pag nasa ayos natin yung mga kalsada natin, yung mga tulay natin, is mas lalong gaganda yung economic activity natin. Katulad na lang ng pagdadala ng mga produkto sa ibang lugar. Dahil nga mas ginagawa natin yung road natin, is magkakaroon ng mas magandang transaction sa ibang lugar. Mas mapapadali yung pagde-deliver ng product sa ibang lugar. So, in summary, fiscal policy is a power tool for shaping economic outcome, promoting equity, and ensuring the well-being of citizens. So, next is, without fiscal policy, what happened? So, without fiscal policy, the economic landscape will be market different. Let's explore the potential consequences. So, first, economic volatility, market failure unrest, income inequality, human capital neglect, uncontrolled business cycle, infrastructure deficit, and lack of crisis response. So what is economic volatility? Business cycle periods of economic expansion and contraction will be more extreme. Recession could be deeper and recovery slower. Fiscal policy helps stabilize the economy by adjusting government spending, and taxation. So next is market failure and address. Market inefficient will be persist. Public goods like infrastructure, education, and healthcare may be unprovided. Social safety nets will be absent, leaving vulnerable population without support. So meaning ng market failure unaddressed is hindi na provide ng government ang mga public goods like infrastructure, education, and healthcare kasi wala silang pondo para i-provide nito. And yung social safety and hindi din nila na-provide kaya walang support sa population. Income inequality. So, pag sinabing income inequality, without fiscal, mutual income disparity will be widened, progressive taxation, and wealth redistribution will not occur. The gap between rich and poor will become more pronounced. So, next is human capital neglect. So, human capital neglect is investment in education and healthcare would suffer. A less educated and less healthy workforce would hinder long-term growth. Uncontrolled business cycle. So, economic fluctuation will be left to market forces alone. Boom and bust could destabilize economy. Infrastructure deficit. Critical infrastructure projects may not receive funding. Roads, bridges, and utilities will deteriorate, affecting productivity. Lack of crisis response. During emergency, such as natural disaster or pandemic, government would lack tools for rapid relief. Stimulus package and aid to affected individuals and businesses will be absent. So meaning ng lack of crisis response, so dito katulad ng mga natural disaster and pandemic, so kung walang fiscal policy is walang pera or walang i-spend na pera ang government para sa mga relief or mga subsidies na ibibigay sa mga tao dahil wala silang pondo. So hindi nila matutugunan yung mga pangangailangan ng tao sa kabila ng crisis na hinaharap ng ating bansa. So, in summary, fiscal policy is a vital tool for promoting stability, addressing market failure, and ensuring the well-being of citizens. Its absence will lead to a less resilient and equitable economy. So, let's watch the video. It's all about President Bongbong Marcos Jr. has emphasized the importance of fiscal policy in shaping the country economy.
Examination we really have to undertake. So whatever fiscal policy is going to be, whatever changes in fiscal policy that we are going to undertake, it will have to come, we have to examine it very, we have to think it through properly. So, yung mga pabigla-bigla na tinataas, binababa, hindi natin magagawa yun.
Pagpapatatag at pagpapaunlad ng ekonomiya ang prioridad ni President-elect Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. Kaya naman ang pagbuo ng economic team ang agad niyang pinagtutuunan ng pansin. Ito ay upang matugunan agad ang tumataas na presyo ng mga bilihin, pagpaparami ng trabaho at relief sa business communities na lubos na naapektuhan ng pandemya. Bunsod nito, masusing pag-aaralan ng President-elect ang mga mungkahi ng outgoing finance chief, partikular na ang fiscal consolidation at resource mobilization plan. Nakapaloob dito ang pagsusulong at pagpapatupad ng mga bagong buwis, pagsasantabi ng personal income tax reductions, pagpapalawig ng value-added tax coverage at iba pa. Nasa 349 billion pesos na halaga ng bagong revenues ang target na ma-generate sa planong ito mula 2023 hanggang 2027. Subalit ayon kay President-elect Marcos, dapat unahin ang mga hakbang tungo sa pagbago ng ekonomiya at dito nakasalalay ang magiging fiscal policies ng pamahalaan.
You cannot just look at one area without trying to anticipate what the real effect will be for the entire economy. And the point I'm making is that we have to have an economic recovery plan, and the fiscal policy will follow that.
Nais nitong gawing simple ang sistema para sa fiscal policy ng gobyerno at plano niyang babaan din ang buwis sa mga pinaka-naapektuhan ng pandemya. Kabilang sa ikinukonsidera nito ang pagkakaloob ng tax amnesty o tax holiday sa mga micro, small and medium enterprises, agricultural at transport sector. Ayon kay outgoing Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez III, kailangan ng fiscal consolidation and resource mobilization plan upang masustain ang long-term investment sa edukasyon, kalusugan, infrastruktura at job creation sa bansa. Subalit batay sa Malacanang, pinauubaya na nito sa economic team ng President-elect ang pagtugon sa issue at gagawing mga hakbang kaugnay ng mga mapagkukunan ng resources ng pamahalaan. Sa gitna ito ng paglobo ng pambansang utang ng Pilipinas sa 12.68 trillion pesos noong March 2022, bunsod ng pandemic-related programs na dahilan ng pag-akyat sa 63.5% ng debt-to-GDP ratio ng bansa, mas mataas sa internationally accepted threshold na 60%. Rosa Licoz, UNTV News and Rescue. Diyos ang aming sandigan, serbisyo publiko ang aming pinahahalagahan.
So this video is my recent example about fiscal policy year 2023 last year. So yung balita na ito is according to the news. Gusto ng President Bongbong Marcos is mapataas at mapaunlad ang bansa, at ang isang priority ni President Bongbong Marcos is kaya pinapatawad niya agad ang economic team para maisakatuparan ito, and more on ito ang focus niya. Ang dahilan niya kaya ginagawa ito is para matugunan ang inflation o ang pagtaas ng presyo ng mga produkto at bilihin. Mapataas ang may trabaho sa bansa o employment rate, and mabalik sa dati ang business establishment sa nagdaang pandemic. Kaya ang government is pinag-aaral mabuti ang proyekto na gustong ipatupad ng ating president sa bansa. Nakapaloob dito ang pagsusulong at pagpatutupad ng bagong buwis. Isa na dito ay ang pagtatago ng personal na income tax reduction, papalawig ng value-added tax cover, at iba pa. Nasa 3.9.3 billion ang target na ma-generate sa plano na gustong ipatupad ng government mula 2023 to 2027. According ulit to President Bongbong Marcos is kailangan muna nating unahin ang plano na ikakaunlad ng bansa, at ito ay susundan ng fiscal policy o dito nakadepende ang fiscal policy ng bansa. Sabi niya is kailangan ng economic recovery plan, and the fiscal policy will follows. Isa din sa plano ng ating president is babaan ng tax rate sa mga lubos na apektuhan ng pandemic, and ang pagpapatupad ng tax amnesty o tax holiday sa mga small and medium enterprises, agriculture and transport sector. Example, in 2021, government spending constitution above 15.3% of the gross domestic product, GDP, the National Expenditure Program, NEP, for fiscal year 2023 outlines total new appropriation of 5.268 trillion with allocation for department, agency, and special purpose funds. Meaning, government expenditure is an important level to drive employment. According to the latest labor force survey, an estimated 1.27 million people in the Philippines work for government and government corporation. This accounts for over 9% of the country's employment. National account also shows the government spending made up about 15.3% of gross domestic product in 2021. So, the National Expenditure Program of the Department of Budget and Management outlines the total appropriation worth 5.268 trillion for the fiscal year 2023, with 3.02 trillion allocated for departments and agencies and 1.257 trillion as a special purpose fund. And netong 2024 tumaas ng 5.7 trillion for national expenditure. So, meron ako ditong video about sa National Expenditure Program.
President Bongbong Marcos has approved the proposed 5.7 trillion peso national budget for 2024. Jean Mangaluz has the report.
President Bongbong Marcos has approved the proposed 5.7 trillion peso national expenditure program for 2024, according to the Department of Budget and Management. The 2024 NEP is 9.5% higher than this year's 5.2 trillion peso budget. It's also 21.8% of the country's gross domestic product. DBM Chief Amena Pangandaman said that the NEP for 2024 was created with the Philippine Development Plan and the 8-point socio-economic agenda in mind. It aimed to address the scarring effects of the pandemic as well as the impact of inflation. Investments in infrastructure projects, human capital development, and sustainable agriculture and food security are among those prioritized in the 2024 NEP. According to Pangandaman, the NEP was a product of several factors, including each agency's budget utilization rates as well as the alignment of their programs, activities, and projects. She said that the NEP will be submitted to Congress a few weeks after the President's State of the Nation address on July 24. The NEP serves as the government's spending plan for each year and is deliberated in both chambers of Congress. Once it's approved, the program is signed into law and will be known as the General Appropriations Act. This is Jean Mangaluz reporting for Inquirer.net.
So, next example is tax reform. The previous administration implemented significant tax reform, resulting in total revenue of 3.05 trillion in 2021, a revenue to GDP effort of 15.5%. However, a post-COVID recovery strategy necessitates stimulating the economy and providing social safety nets. As a result, spending outpaced revenue, leading to deficit ratio of 8.6% of GDP. So, after passing significant tax reforms during the previous administration, the government was able to collect total revenue worth 3.5 trillion in 2021, which is revenue to GDP effort of 15.5%. A post-COVID recovery strategy, however, will necessarily entail stimulating the economy and providing social safety nets. Spending thus outpaced revenue by 1.67 trillion for a deficit ratio of 8.6% of GDP. So next is debt and borrowing. When the government spending exceeds revenue collection, borrowing becomes necessary. As a consequence of recent above-average deficit, the country's outstanding debt has risen to 13.206 trillion as of June 2022, up from a pre-pandemic level of 8.220 trillion by the end of the 2019. The debt to GDP ratio has increased from 42% to 64%. So, when the government spends more than its collect in revenue, it must borrow either domestically or foreign creditor. As consequences of the recent above-average deficit, outstanding debt has risen to 13.206 trillion as of June 2022 for a pre-pandemic level of 8.220 trillion by the end of 2019. The debt ratio has increased from 42% of GDP to 64% of GDP. Future fiscal planning. The incoming Marcos Jr. administration aims to craft a 6-year fiscal plan with the goal of bridging the Philippines back to pre-pandemic budget deficit level by 2028. In summary, President Bongbong Marcos Jr. is committed to implementing sound fiscal policy that balance spending priorities, revenue collection, and debt management to boost the Philippine economy. So, meron ulit akong video na ipapakita is all about debt and debt payments.
The Bureau of Treasury says the national government's outstanding debt is at 14.10 trillion pesos as of May 2023. According to the Treasury, the level of debt grew by 185.40 billion pesos or 1.3% from April 2023. Out of the total debt, 32% is external and 68% is domestic. According to the BTR, the domestic debt is 9.59 billion pesos, which is 130.67 billion pesos or 1.4% higher than April. Meanwhile, external debt amounted to 4.51 trillion pesos in the same month, which was 54.73 billion or 1.2% higher than the month prior. The Bureau says the Philippine peso's depreciation against the US dollar is a factor in the increase in the total money owed by the government.
Debts paid by the Marcos administration hit 1.48 trillion as of end October. The Treasury Bureau reports the government exceeded last year's debt payments by 59%. The payments accounted for about 95% of the program debt payments for 2023. As of October, the country's total debt is at 14.48 trillion pesos.
So, in summary, according to Bureau of Treasury, the outstanding debt of the Philippines is 14.10 trillion pesos as of 2023. 32% of debt is external and the 68% is domestic. According to the news, the total debt in domestic is 9.59 billion pesos. So, tumaas siya ng 1.4% noong April. And nung external debt naman is umabot ng 51 trillion debt at the same month. At tumaas siya ng 2% sa prior month. So, sa next video naman is dito ni-explain na nakabayad na si President Bongbong Marcos ng utang na 1.48 trillion as of end of October, and sinabi dito na tumaas ang debt payment ng 59% compare sa nakaraan. So, as of October 2023, the total debt of the Philippines is 14.48 trillion pesos. So, that's all, and I hope you learned something to my report, and mas lalo nyong nakilala ano nga ba ang function ng fiscal, and ano nga ba ang fiscal policy at bakit ito importante sa ating bansa. So, thank you for listening.